Everything the Bible teaches about tithing. Preliminary notes. All biblical quotes come from the modern King James Version of the Bible, unless otherwise stated, and they are in turquoise font. All my thoughts are in black font. I use the name Yahuwah for the holy name of God. I use the name Yahusha for Jesus, as it was his Hebrew name, and I often use Messiah instead of Christ. All my studies are free to download, use, and share, and can be found at the following link. The link will also be included in the description of this video. There is a distinct difference between tithing and giving. I begin this study by giving a biblical explanation of what tithing actually is, but please understand that I am not against giving to your church or anywhere else. Since tithing is one of the biggest criticisms of the church, I thought I would study this topic thoroughly and biblically. Originally, I was trying to convince someone of the importance of tithing, but I had to clear my mind of all former teachings that I had heard on this subject and start from the beginning of the Bible. What I found is that tithing and giving are very different. This study includes everything the Bible teaches about tithing. First of all, there are different kinds of giving. There is a free will offering. This can be for any reason, usually for thanksgiving or to show love. In this case, a person could give anything to God. For example, Hannah gave Samuel to serve Yahuwah at his temple, and people donated gold for building the temple. There were also burnt offerings. These were offered for a specific purpose, like atonement. Finally, there were yearly tithes and tithes to help the poor. These were mandatory and specifically described by Yahuwah in the Bible. The word tithe, or in the Hebrew masrah, means tenth. It is used only 32 times in the Old Testament, and I include every verse in this study. And it first appears in Scripture with Abraham in Genesis 14. Section 1. Abraham never tithed on his own personal property or livestock, neither did he tithe yearly. At this point in Scripture, Abraham is still called Abram, as Yahuwah has not yet changed his name to Abraham. 5 kings had banded together and had taken captive all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, including Abram's relative Lot. Genesis 14, beginning at 14. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he led forth his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them to Dan. And he divided himself against them by night, he and his servants. And he struck them and pursued them to Hobah, which is on the left of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer, and of the kings with him, at the valley of Sheva, which is the king's valley. And Melchizedek the king of Salem brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him tithes of all. It seems ambiguous as to who gave the tithe, because it just says he, and Melchizedek was the one who was speaking. However, in the New Testament, we are told that it was indeed Abram who gave the tenth, in Hebrews 7, 1 and 2. Therefore, Abram gives Melchizedek 1/10 of the spoils of war. This tenth is not from Abraham's own property. It was the property that was recovered from the enemy kings who had raided Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham doesn't even keep the rest of the spoils, as we see in the next part of the passage. Genesis 14, beginning at 21. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people, and take the goods for yourself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I had lifted up my hand to Yahuwah, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take from all that is yours, not from a thread, even to a shoestring, lest you say, I have made Abram rich. Nothing for me, only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their portion. This is the one and only mention of Abram giving a tithe. Many point to this passage to show that tithing predated the Mosaic law. However, tithe in this verse simply means tenth. Abraham gave a tenth of the spoils of war to Melchizedek as a one-time offering. He could have chosen any amount because it was a free will offering. Here are some interesting points to notice. Yahuwah did not ask for this tithe or tenth. This is why it was considered a free will offering. This tithe was given from goods that had already been received and not on blessings yet to come, nor was it from Abram's property. It was a one-time tithe offered up to give thanks to Yahuwah, who had given him victory over his enemies. Section 2. Jacob only tithed after God blessed him. The next time a tenth is offered occurs when Jacob is fleeing from his brother Esau in Genesis 28. This time it is personal belongings that are promised. In this passage, Jacob has just dreamed of the ladder to heaven and was given a promise from Yahuwah that he would become very prosperous and that Yahuwah would be with him and protect him. It is also made very clear that Yahuwah is promising Jacob the land of Canaan as an inheritance. When Jacob awakes, he responds with a vow. Genesis 28, beginning at 20. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and clothing to put on, and I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall Yahuwah be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you shall give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. Once again, there are things to note. Jacob does not offer to pay the tenth immediately based on the promise of blessings to come. He says he will give Yahuwah a tenth after God has blessed him. Yahuwah did not ask for the tithe. It is also interesting to note that Jacob did not inherit the promised land in his lifetime. It was his descendants who inherit the land. We also never hear of him keeping this promised tithe. I personally believe that he did keep his promise to God. However, the Bible doesn't say for certain. The Bible does record a drink offering when Jacob returns to Bethel, and every item he offered to his brother Esau. But whether he keeps this promised tithe or was waiting for the inheritance of the land, we just can't say from the Bible. Section 3. Tithing was linked to God's provision in the Promised Land. The next time we see a tithe mentioned is in Leviticus 27. The preceding chapter includes a beautiful promise from Yahuwah to his people. It says in Leviticus 26, beginning at 3, If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. And your threshing shall reach to the vintage, and the vintage shall reach to the sowing time. And you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land in safety. And I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land, neither shall the sword go through your land. And you shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. And your enemies shall fall by the sword in front of you. For I will have respect to you, and make you fruitful, and multiply you, and establish my covenant with you. And you shall eat of the old provision, and clear away the old because of the new. And I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. And I will walk among you, and will be your God, and you shall be my people. The land is mentioned over and over in this passage. The blessings which Yahuwah promises to send are for when they come into the land and receive their inheritance from him. His promises include prosperity and protection. Likewise, the tithes he requires of Israel are tied to the promised land, and the prosperity the land brings them. We see this more clearly in Deuteronomy 12, 8-11. You shall not do according to all that we do here today, each doing whatever is right in his own eyes. For you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance which Yahuwah your God gives you. But when you go over Jordan and live in the land which Yahuwah your God gives you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies all around so that you live in safety, then there shall be a place which Yahuwah your God shall choose, to cause his name to dwell there. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which you vow to Yahuwah. So even though Israel had already received the law, tithes were not to be collected until they reached the Promised Land. They had donated many items for the building of the tabernacle, but they did not tithe. Not only did tithing not start until they arrived in the Promised Land, but it also ceased many years later when the Israelites were in exile in Babylon, though I'm sure they paid taxes there. When they returned from exile, tithing was re-established by Nehemiah once the house of God was finished. We will come back and read the passage from Nehemiah in section 6. Summary notes. Even though God gave the rules for tithing in the wilderness, it did not begin until they reached the Promised Land. When they were in exile away from the Promised Land, there were no tithes. The tithes were re-established once the house of God was completed. So here's a question. Do you live in the Promised Land? If not, you don't need to tithe. Section 4. Only items from the land were tithable. Leviticus 27 beginning at 30. And all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or of the fruit of the tree, is Yahuwah's. It is holy to Yahuwah. And if a man will at all redeem anything of his tithes, he shall add to it the 5th part of it. And all the tithe of the herd, or of the flock, all that passes under the rod, 1/10 shall be holy to Yahuwah. He shall not search whether it is good or bad, neither shall he change it. And if he changes it at all, then both it and the change of it shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. These are the commandments which Yahuwah commanded Moses for the sons of Israel in Mount Sinai. Summary notes. Yahuwah asks for tithes based on the blessings he gives his people in the Promised Land. The tithes are all from the land. Fishermen do not tithe fish, though they were not considered an unclean animal. And doves could be used for offerings, but not for tithing. There is no mention of giving money, though money was common long before the time of Moses. Abraham bought a field with 100 shekels of silver. Abimelech gives Abram 1,000 pieces of silver for taking Sarah. And Joseph put silver in his brothers' bags in Egypt. At the time the law was given, special vows were accompanied by shekels of silver in Leviticus 27, 1-8, which is the same chapter that teaches on tithing. There was also booming trade at this time, and yet merchants such as tent makers and cloth dyers were not commanded to give 1/10 of their income. It was also not the best of what one owned that was given to Yahuwah. It was the 10th to pass under the rod, whether it was good or bad. Sacrifices, on the other hand, did have to be perfect. So here's another question. Do you own livestock or produce in Israel? If not, you do not tithe. Section 5. Only Levite priests could collect tithes, and only at the temple. Numbers 18, beginning at 20. And Yahuwah said to Aaron, You shall have no inheritance in their land, neither shall you have any part among them. I am your part, and your inheritance among the sons of Israel. And behold, I have given the sons of Levi all the 10th in Israel for an inheritance, for their service which they serve, the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. Neither must the sons of Israel come near the tabernacle of the congregation from now on, lest they bear sin and die. But the Levites shall do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they shall bear their iniquity, a statute forever throughout your generations, that among the sons of Israel they have no inheritance, but the tithes of the sons of Israel, which they offer as a heave offering to Yahuwah, I have given to the Levites to inherit. Therefore I have said to them, Among the sons of Israel they shall have no inheritance. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, And you shall speak to the Levites, and you shall say to them, When you take tithes from the sons of Israel, which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall offer up a heave offering of it for Yahuwah, 1/10 of the tithe. And your heave offering shall be credited to you as grain of the threshing floor, and as the fullness of the winepress. So you also shall offer a heave offering to Yahuwah of all your tithes, which you receive from the sons of Israel. And you shall give it from Yahuwah's heave offering to Aaron the priest. Out of all your gifts you shall offer every heave offering of Yahuwah, of all its fat, the holy part out of it. And you shall say to them, When you have lifted up its fat, then it shall be credited to the Levites as the increase of the threshing floor, and as the increase of the winepress. And you shall eat it in every place, you and your households, for it is your reward for your service in the tabernacle of the congregation. And you shall bear no sin because of it, when you have lifted up the fat of it. Neither shall you defile the holy things of the sons of Israel, lest you die. Summary notes. Only Levites could collect tithes, because the Levites had no inheritance in the land like the other tribes did. So Yahweh gave them the tithes as their inheritance. In this way, they too could receive the blessings of the promised land. This is the whole reason that tithes were instituted. The Levites also tithed. 1/10 of the tithe they were given from Israel. Therefore, the amount that went to God was 1%, 1/10 of the tithe, although technically it went to the high priest. And once again, no money is given. Deuteronomy 12, beginning at 5. But you shall seek to the place which Yahweh your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there. Even to his dwelling place you shall seek, and there you shall come. And there you shall bring your burnt offerings, and your sacrifices, and your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and your vows, and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and of your flocks. And there you shall eat before Yahweh your God, and you shall rejoice in all that you put your hand to, you and your households in which Yahweh your God has blessed you. You shall not do according to all that we do here today, each doing whatever is right in his own eyes. For you have not as yet come to the rest and to the inheritance which Yahweh your God gives you. But when you go over Jordan and live in the land which Yahweh your God gives you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies all around so that you live in safety, then there shall be a place which Yahweh your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which you vow to Yahweh. And you shall rejoice before Yahweh your God, you, your sons, your daughters, your menservants, and your female servants, and the Levite that is within your gates, because he has no part nor inheritance with you. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but only in the place which Yahweh shall choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. We're going to continue on in this passage in a minute. First, I want to make a few summary notes. The tithes were to be brought only to the place that Yahweh chose and nowhere else. Originally, this was at Shiloh, and later the temple, which was built by Solomon, at the threshing floor of Arunah the Jebusite. And as previously stated, at the time the law was given, it was not put into effect. Even though Yahweh's presence dwelt in the tabernacle that was with them in the wilderness, it was not until they inherited the promised land that this became an act of law. Therefore, tithing was not a law until they inherited the promised land, the very land that Yahweh had promised Jacob when Jacob offered the 10th. Continuing on, however, with all your soul's desire, you shall sacrifice and eat flesh in all your gates, according to the blessings of Yahweh your God, which he has given you. The clean and the unclean one may eat, as of the gazelle and as of the hart. Only you shall not eat the blood. You shall pour it on the earth like water. You may not eat inside your gates the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil, or the firstborn of your herds, or of your flock, or any of your vows which you vow, or your free will offerings, or the heave offering of your hand. But you must eat them before Yahweh your God, in the place which Yahweh your God shall choose, you and your son and your daughter, and your manservant and your maidservant, and the Levite within your gates. And you shall rejoice before Yahweh your God in all that you put your hand to. Take heed to yourself that you do not forsake the Levite as long as you live on the earth. When Yahweh your God shall make your border larger, as he has promised you, and you shall say, I will eat flesh, because your soul longs to eat flesh, you may eat flesh, whatever your soul desires. If the place which Yahweh your God has chosen to put his name there is too far from you, then you shall kill of your herd and of your flock, which Yahweh has given you, as I have commanded you, and you shall eat in your gates whatever your soul desires. Even as the gazelle and the hart is eaten, so you shall eat them. The unclean and the clean shall eat of them alike. Only be sure that you do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you may not eat the life with the flesh. You shall not eat of it. You shall pour it on the earth like water. You shall not eat it, so that it may go well with you and with your sons after you, when you shall do what is right in the sight of Yahuwah. Only your holy things which you have and your vows you shall take and go to the place which Yahuwah shall choose. And you shall offer your burnt offerings, the flesh and the blood, on the altar of Yahuwah your God, and the blood of your sacrifices shall be poured out on the altar of Yahuwah your God, and you shall eat the flesh. Here are our notes. You could not eat any of your tithes at your own home. It had to be taken to Jerusalem and eaten in the presence of Yahuwah. Yes, you ate at least a portion of your own tithe. You could eat meat at your own home and sacrifice there, but you could not offer any burnt offerings there. And there was still no mention of any money being tithed. Here's another question. Can your priest trace his or her genealogy back to Aaron the high priest? If not, then he or she cannot collect tithes. Section 6. Money could not be tithed. Deuteronomy 14, beginning at 22. You shall truly tithe all the increase of your seed that the field brings forth year by year. And you shall eat before Yahuwah your God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstborn of your herds and of your flocks, so that you may learn to fear Yahuwah your God always. And if the way is too long for you, so that you are not able to carry it, or if the place is too far from you, which Yahuwah your God shall choose to set his name there, when Yahuwah your God has blessed you, then you shall turn it into silver, and bind up the silver in your hand, and shall go to the place which Yahuwah your God shall choose. And you shall pay that silver for whatever your soul desires, for oxen, or sheep, or wine, or strong drink, or for whatever your soul desires. And you shall eat there before Yahuwah your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household, and the Levite within your gates. You shall not forsake him, for he has no part nor inheritance with you. At the end of 3 years you shall bring forth all the tithe of your increase, the same year, and shall lay it up inside your gates. And the Levite, because he has no part nor inheritance with you, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are inside your gates, shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, so that Yahuwah your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. Summary notes. There were 2 tithes on your possessions as a landowner in Israel. Each year you brought your tithe to Jerusalem and gave a portion of what you brought to the Levites at the temple. This included your other offerings and vows. A portion of your tithe was for you and your whole household, including servants, to feast and drink in the presence of Yahweh. Servants, by the way, did not tithe from their wages. Only landowners tithed, once again because the tithe was tied to the promised land. Every 3rd year there was a different tithe. It was called the tithe of increase. This tithe was to thank Yahuwah for increasing your flocks and produce. For example, if you had 100 sheep 3 years ago and now you have 110, the 10 sheep are your increase. You would store 1/10 of the increase locally, in this case 1 sheep, and it would be given to the poor. You would do this for all your livestock and produce. By the time of Josephus, about 40 years after the death and resurrection of Yahusha, 3 separate tithes were being collected: the tithe of grain and fruit, which was eaten by your own family and the Levites at Jerusalem, a tithe for the priests, and a tithe for the poor and Levites. However, none of them included money. Many people had a profession beyond farming their own land: weavers, tent makers, fishermen, etc., and they were not ordered to tithe on their own income. You will not find this mentioned anywhere in the Bible. When Moses speaks again of tithing, it is in Deuteronomy 26, and it is still linked to the Promised Land. Deuteronomy 26, beginning at the 1st verse. And it shall be, when you come into the land which Yahuwah your God gives you for an inheritance, and possess it, and live in it, You shall take of the first of all the fruit of the earth which you shall bring of your land that Yahweh your God gives you, and you shall put it in a basket, and shall go to the place which Yahweh your God shall choose to place his name there. And you shall go to the priest in those days, and say to him, I profess today to Yahweh your God that I have come into the land which Yahweh swore to our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of your hand, and set it down before the altar of Yahweh your God. And you shall speak and say before Yahweh your God, My father was a Syrian, ready to perish, and he went down to Egypt, and stayed there with a few, and became there a nation great, mighty, and many. And the Egyptians ill-treated us, and afflicted us, and laid hard bondage on us. And when we cried to Yahweh, the God of our fathers, Yahweh heard our voice, and looked on our afflictions, and our labor, and our oppression. And Yahweh brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with fearful might, and with miracles, and with wonders. And he has brought us into this place, and has given us this land, a land that flows with milk and honey. And now behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which you, O Yahweh, have given me. And you shall set it before Yahweh your God, and worship before Yahweh your God. And you shall rejoice in all the good which Yahweh your God has given to you, and to your house, you and the Levite, and the stranger in your midst. When you have made an end of tithing all the tithes of your increase, the 3rd year, the year of tithing, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat inside your gates and be filled. Then you shall say before Yahweh your God, I have brought away the holy things out of my house, and also have given them to the Levite, and to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow, according to all your commandments which you have commanded me. I have not broken your commandments, neither have I forgotten. I have not eaten of it in my mourning, neither have I put any of it away for unclean use, nor have I given of it for the dead. I have listened to the voice of Yahweh my God, and have done according to all that you have commanded me. Look down from your holy dwelling from heaven, and bless your people Israel, and the land which you have given us, as you swore to our fathers, a land that flows with milk and honey. Summary notes. The tithe was tied to the promised land, and the tithe was to be eaten. The next time tithing is mentioned is during the reign of Hezekiah. The nation had previously slipped into false worship, and they were just returning to Yahweh under Hezekiah's rule. Tithes had not been collected in years. 2 Chronicles 31, beginning at 2. And Hezekiah set the courses of the priests and the Levites according to their divisions, each according to his service, the priests and Levites, for burnt offerings and for peace offerings, to minister and to give thanks, and to praise in the gates of the tents of Yahweh. And the king's portion from his goods was for burnt offerings, and for burnt offerings of the morning and the evening, and the burnt offerings of the Sabbaths, and for the new moons, and for the set feasts, as it is written in the law of Yahweh. And he commanded the people who lived in Jerusalem to give the portion of the priests and the Levites, so that they might be strong in the law of Yahweh. And as the command spread, the sons of Israel brought plentifully of the first fruits of corn, wine, and oil, and honey, and all of the increase of the field. And the tithe of all things they brought in abundance. And the sons of Israel and Judah, who lived in the cities of Judah, they also brought in the tithe of oxen and sheep, and the tithe of holy things, which were consecrated to Yahweh their God, and laid it up by heaps. In the 3rd month they began to lay the foundation of the heaps, and finished in the 7th month. And Hezekiah and the rulers came and saw the heaps, and they blessed Yahweh and his people Israel. And Hezekiah asked the priests and Levites concerning the heaps. And Azariah the chief priest of the house of Zadok answered him and said, Since the people began to bring the offerings into the house of Yahweh, we have had enough to eat, and plenty left, for Yahweh has blessed his people, and this great store is left. And Hezekiah commanded storehouses to be prepared in the house of Yahweh, and they prepared, and brought in the offerings and the tithes and the things dedicated to God faithfully. And over them was Conaniah the Levite ruler, and Shimei his brother the next. Summary note. Only food items are mentioned whenever the Bible talks about tithing. In Nehemiah's time, the Jewish people are returning from the Babylonian captivity, and they're restarting the tithing process. While they were in captivity, they did not tithe. However, now that they have returned to the promised land and have Levites and a temple, they will tithe again. Nehemiah 10, beginning at 34. And we cast the lots among the priests and the Levites and the people for the wood offering to bring into the house of our God according to the houses of our fathers, at times appointed year by year, to burn upon the altar of Yahuwah our God, as it is written in the law, and to bring the first fruits of our ground, and the first fruits of all fruit of all trees year by year, to the house of Yahuwah, and to bring the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle, as it is written in the law, and the firstlings of our herds and of our flocks, to bring to the house of our God, to the priests who minister in the house of our God, and that we should bring the firstfruits of our dough and our offerings, and the fruit of all kinds of trees, of wine and of oil, to the priests, to the rooms of the house of God, and the tithes of our ground to the Levites, and they, the Levites, might have the tithes in all the cities we farmed. And the priest, the son of Aaron, shall be with the Levites when the Levites take tithes, and the Levites shall bring up the tithe of the tithes to the house of our God, to the rooms into the treasure house. For the sons of Israel and the sons of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain, of the new wine, and of the oil, to the rooms where the vessels of the sanctuary are, and the priests who minister, and the gatekeepers, and the singers. And we will not forsake the house of our God. And at that time some were chosen over the rooms for the treasuries, for the offerings, for the firstfruits, and for the tithes, to gather them out of the fields of the cities at the portions of the law for the priests and the Levites. For Judah rejoiced for the priests and for the Levites who waited. And he had prepared for himself a large room where they had in days of old laid the food offering, the frankincense and the vessels, and the tithes of the grain, the new wine, and the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites and the singers and the gatekeepers, and the offerings of the priests. Between this portion in the Bible and the next, Nehemiah returns to Babylon for a time. When he comes back, he finds that the people had neglected to tithe while he was gone. Nehemiah 13, beginning at 10. And I saw that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them, for the Levites and the singers who did the work had each fled to his own field. And I contended with the rulers and said, Why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. And all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil into the treasuries. Summary note. The only item mentioned above, which is not a food item, is the firstborn sons, who were indeed redeemed by money. But this was a one-time offering per family, and not a yearly tithe. In Ezekiel, we see the word tenth used twice, but it is describing measurements, not tithing, so we can move on to Amos 4:4. In this passage, God is rebuking Israel for sin, and tithing is mentioned, but it is where they are taking the tithe that is the problem. They are not taking it to Jerusalem, to the temple. Please understand, you couldn't just tithe anywhere if you were a landowner in Israel. Even if you had a Levite within your gate, you still had to go to the temple. Amos 4:4. Come to Bethel and transgress, to Gilgal and multiply transgressing at Gilgal, and bring your sacrifices for the morning and your tithes for 3 years. Last of all, at least in the Old Testament, Malachi speaks of tithing. These are probably the most commonly quoted tithe verses in the entire Bible. This entire book is not directed at the people of Israel. In fact, it mentions that they were bringing tithes. The book is directed at the Levites themselves. They were no longer giving their tithe to God, and God accuses them of not only robbing him, but of robbing the whole nation. But who can endure the day of his coming, and who shall stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap, and he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. And he shall purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may be offerers of a food offering in righteousness to Yahuwah. Then the food offering of Judah and Jerusalem shall be pleasing to Yahuwah, as in the days of old, as in the former years. And I will come near to you to judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against false swearers, and against those who extort from the hired laborer's wages, and turning away the widow and the orphan, the alien, and not fearing me, said Yahuwah of hosts. For I am Yahuwah, I change not. Because of this, you sons of Jacob are not destroyed. From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says Yahweh of hosts. But you say, in what way shall we return? Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what have we robbed you? In the tithe and the offering. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the nation, all of it. Bring all the tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and test me now with this, says Yahweh of hosts, to see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you, and pour out a blessing for you until there is not enough room. And I will rebuke your devourer, and he shall not decay the fruit of your ground against you, nor shall your vine miscarry against you in the field, says Yahweh of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for you shall be a delightful land, says Yahweh of hosts. Summary notes. The book of Malachi is rebuking the Levites specifically. It was the priests, the Levites, who were robbing God and the whole nation by misusing the tithes and not bringing them to the storehouses in the temple. This was not the first time in Israel's history when priests were not using the holy offerings properly. The sons of Aaron and Eli had also misused their positions and were killed for it. A question: are you being asked to tithe money? If so, this is not biblical. Section 7. Christian converts were not asked to tithe to the church, but they did give to the church. Now we will look at the New Testament. The words for tithe in Greek are apotikatu and dikatu. They are used a total of 6 times in the New Testament. In Luke 11:42 it says, "But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and pass over judgment and the love of God. You ought to have done these, and not to leave the other undone." Summary note. Still, only food products are mentioned with tithing in the New Testament. The Pharisees made a big show of being holy. Yahusha points out that though they even tithed of their herbs, they were failing because they had forsaken honest judgment and love. Notice he says they ought to have tithed the herbs. They were, after all, produce of the land. The following passage is a parable that Yahusha tells in Luke. Luke 18, beginning at 9. "And he spoke this parable to certain ones who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed within himself in this way: God, I thank you that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterous, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice on the Sabbath. I give tithes of all that I possess. And standing afar off, the tax collector would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but struck on his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself shall be abased, and he who humbles himself shall be exalted." Summary note. Notice that it is the behavior of the man who gives the proper tithe that Yahusha condemns. However, the correction has nothing to do with tithing. Yahusha was explaining that God dislikes a prideful heart, yet has pity for a sinner who is repentant. In Hebrews 7, 5-8, the writer tells about when Abraham gave Melchizedek a tenth, and that now the Levites collect it from their brothers in the Promised Land. If you read through the book of Hebrews, it becomes clear that the point the writer is making is not about tithing, but about the priesthood. The priesthood existed before the Mosaic law in Melchizedek, and now the position of high priest is filled by Yahusha forever. Hebrews 7, beginning at 5. And truly, they who are the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priest, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, from their brothers, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. But he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes from Abraham, and blessed him who had the promises. And without all contradiction, the lesser is blessed by the better. And here men who die receive tithes, but there he receives them, of whom it is witnessed that he lives. Now that Yahusha has fulfilled the law and is our high priest, we, the people of God, are the holy priesthood. 1 Peter 2:5. You also, as living stones, are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Yahusha Messiah. Revelation 1, beginning at 4. John to the 7 churches which are in Asia. Grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is coming, and from the 7 spirits which are before his throne, even from Yahusha Messiah, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. To him who loved us and washed us from our sins in his own blood, and made us kings and priests to God and his Father, to him be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. In Revelation 5, 9 and 10. And they sang a new song, saying, You are worthy to take the book and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood, out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation. And you made us kings and priests to our God, and we will reign over the earth. Not only are we priests, but we are also the temple in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 3, beginning at 16. Do you not know that you are a temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God shall destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, which you are. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit in you, whom you have of God, and you are not your own? And what agreement does the temple of God have with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, as God has said, I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Summary notes. Yahusha is the only high priest, and we are the priesthood under Yahusha, and our bodies are the temple of God. However, this does not mean that we do not need to give. There was giving in the early church. It's called a free will offering. 1 Corinthians 16, 1-3. And concerning the collection for the saints, as I charge the churches of Galatia, so also you do. On the first of the Sabbaths, let each of you put by himself, storing up whatever he has prospered, so that there may be no collections when I come. And when I come, whomever you shall approve by your letters, I will send them to bring your gift to Jerusalem. 2 Corinthians 8, beginning at 7. Indeed, the more your faith, speech, knowledge, enthusiasm, and love for us increase, the more we want you to be rich in this work of kindness. I am not commanding you, but testing the genuineness of your love by the enthusiasm of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Yahusha the Messiah. Although he was rich, for your sakes he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. I am giving you my opinion on this matter, because it will be helpful to you. Last year, you were not only willing to do something, but had already started to do it. Now finish what you began, so that your eagerness to do so may be matched by your eagerness to complete it. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what you have, not according to what you do not have. Not that others should have relief while you have hardship. Rather, it is a question of fairness. At the present time, your surplus fills their need, so that their surplus may fill your need. In this way, things are fair. 2 Corinthians 9, beginning at 5. Therefore, I thought it necessary to urge these brothers to visit you ahead of me, to make arrangements in advance for this gift you promised, and to have it ready as something given generously and not forced. Remember this, the person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the person who sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you must give what you have decided in your heart, not with regret or under compulsion, since God loves a cheerful giver. Both of those passages I took from the International Standard Version of the Bible. Ephesians 4:28. Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, so that he may have something to give to him who needs. Paul tells us repeatedly that we are not under the law. Tithing was part of the law that was specifically linked to the temple and the Levitical priesthood, and has passed away because Yahusha has taken the place of the high priest. Just as we no longer have animal sacrifices, because Yahusha was the final sacrifice. However, we are told to give out of our abundance to those in need. That is our command in the New Testament. Now we are to give happily to those who are poor or suffering, as we are able. Now I'll do a full biblical summary of tithing. 1. Tithing is only for those who are residing in the Promised Land. Tithes were not collected before they reached the Promised Land, even though they already had the law of tithing and they had the tabernacle. They did not tithe when they were in captivity in Babylon. 2. Tithes were only food products, specifically from the Promised Land, and were eaten by you, your family, the Levites, your servants, widows, orphans, and even people of other nationalities, the stranger in your gate. If you were in trade, none of your income was tithed. Fishermen did not tithe fish. 3. Only landowners tithed. Servants did not tithe, the widow did not tithe, the poor did not tithe. 4. Tithes could only be taken to the temple. It was forbidden to eat your tithe in your own town. It had to be taken to Jerusalem. There is no temple in Jerusalem anymore. And 5. Tithes were for the Levites. The Levites did not have an inheritance in the land. Tithing allowed the Levites to partake of Yahuwah's blessings and the abundance of the Promised Land. Section 8. Tithing was not part of the early church, and tithing money did not appear until over 1,000 years after Yahusha. The following blue font excerpts are from the Catholic Encyclopedia, though I have underlined some of the key words. In the Christian Church, as those who serve the altar should live by the altar, provision of some kind had necessarily to be made for the sacred ministers. In the beginning, this was supplied by the spontaneous offerings of the faithful. This means that tithing was not taught in the early church, only free will offerings. In the course of time, however, as the church expanded and various institutions arose, it became necessary to make laws which would ensure the proper and permanent support of the clergy. The payment of tithes was adopted from the old law, and early writers speak of it as a divine ordinance and an obligation of conscience. This means the Catholic Church, not the Bible, made the law of tithing, adapting it from the old law to suit their needs. Quote, the earliest positive legislation on the subject seems to be contained in the letter of the bishops assembled at Tours in 567 and the canons of the Council of Maison in 585. This was limited to the local churches of those cities at first. In course of time, we find the payment of tithes made obligatory by ecclesiastical enactments of the countries of Christendom. The Church looked on this payment as of divine law, since tithes were instituted not by man, but by the Lord himself. As regards the civil power, the Christian Roman emperors granted the right of churches of retaining a portion of the produce of certain lands, but the earliest instance of the enforcement of the payment of ecclesiastical tithes by civil law is to be found in the Capitularies of Charlemagne at the end of the 8th century. And therefore tithing was not enforced until just before 800 AD, and it was still only produce. Quote, English law very early recognized the tithe, as in the regions of Athelstan, Edgar, and Canute before the Norman conquest. In English statute law proper, however, the first mention of tithes is to be found in the Statute of Westminster of 1285. Tithes of 3 kinds: predial, or that derived from the annual crops; mixed, or what arises from things nourished by the land, as cattle, milk, cheese, wool; and personal, or the result of industry or occupation. Predial tithes were generally called great tithes, and mixed and personal tithes small tithes. Natural substances having no annual increase are not tithable, nor are wild animals. When property is inherited or donated, it is not subject to the law of tithes, but its natural increase is. There are many exempted from the paying of tithes: spiritual corporations, the owners of uncultivated lands, those who have acquired lawful prescription, or have obtained a legal renunciation, or received a privilege from the Pope. So it was over 1,000 years after Yahusha before tithes were collected in the form of money. In closing, I just want to say that if you are attending a church, you should probably support that church, and the ministries that God puts on your heart, just as the early church supported Paul in his ministry. We should be giving to those who are in need, but it is wrong to say that God demands 10%. Most of the tithes in Israel were eaten by the family that brought them. Only a portion of the tithe was given to the Levites, and only a tenth of that was given to God. So 1%, not 10%. It is good to give, and a wonderful way to show our love for God. If you are living in abundance, and your wealth has increased, you should be giving. The amount is up to you, and since you are both priest and temple, the recipient is also up to you. Give from a place of joy with a thankful heart for all that God has blessed you with.